Welcome to the fourth of this future funding series of webinars. The first three we've had a focus on income generation across society, partnerships, and I can't remember the other one, and another one. And we're really kind of trying to look at how we can support everyone in income recovery, particularly post-COVID with these. As part of future funding, we've also got the ongoing developing programme, which is a talk programme, and we will be, over the next month or so, be releasing places for that for the second, third and fourth cohorts, which will be beginning in August or September of this year. But for the moment, we are just going to focus on commissioning. We've got some brilliant speakers today. We've got Cathy Evans, who's the Chief Exec of Children England, Diana Eamons, who is National Lead for Libraries from GLL, and then we've got Michael Sellers and Steph Jones from Star Procurement, which is a procurement vehicle that's been set up by Stockport, Trafford, Tameside and Rochdale local authorities as a vehicle to commission out some of their services. So just wanted to talk initially about why we're looking at commissioning for libraries. Really, it feels like commissioning is an opportunity for libraries to put forward abilities in new areas. So look at what services libraries can deliver that are outside what they're currently delivering, or expanding what they're currently delivering, or really building on the stuff that's already there. Making sure they've got services aligned with the impact libraries are seeking to make, because a lot of these commission services are coming from services which benefit communities, so services which focus on supporting children and families, supporting vulnerable adults, supporting people with health and education. It really kind of feels like all of these services align with what libraries are really seeking to do. Looking at routes into developing ongoing partnerships, either with local authorities, with health, with CCGs, and looking at how an initial tender or initial commission could potentially lead to something that's much more bespoke and much more about an equal partnership as well. And then the opportunity to get involved and shape future services. So libraries have got huge expertise in delivering services to their communities, and how they can bring that into the development of future commissioning opportunities. And of course, the key thing, a lot of the commission services are robust multi-year funding. So most things have got 2-3 years that libraries can then recruit to, plan around, and actually start to build part of their income base around as well. And one of the critical things that came out of the DCMS task force report was a real focus for commissioners to be thinking about libraries, and that libraries can deliver, and that when commissioning services, we should be thinking about libraries first. So the question here is, can libraries deliver on these things? And what libraries need to be thinking, I think, is these four things really. Sort of, do they have the resources? Does the opportunity cover all the costs? And does that include risk and contingency costs as well? And MEET is this horrible acronym that comes up in tendering all the time, of most economically advantageous tender. But the key thing around that is really that the quality part of the tender, in terms of the level of quality that you would provide through the service, is balanced against the cost of it. So rather than thinking about putting in the lowest possible bid, the real aim should be about putting in the highest quality bid, and then making sure that the costs are balanced against that as well. So don't worry, and don't essentially try and underprice yourselves. I think particularly with libraries who are used to providing a lot of services for free to communities, to other partners and things like that, we do undervalue and undercost quite a lot. So we just need to make sure that we are really fully costing what we're doing, and making sure that we are not underpricing ourselves within those tenders. And then how does it align with ways of working? Is that change work needed within the teams and within the organisation as part of that implementation? How brought in are the staff? What we found with some services, so the UKVI service, one of the commercial services that libraries are offering, Some libraries have been able to do it straight away and really just embraced it. Some libraries have had resistance from their staff teams, partly in terms of things like seeking feedback from staff, feedback from applicants and participants in the programme as well, on the basis that it's often for library services, the kind of universal services that libraries provide, there's an expectation that names aren't necessarily taken. People can just turn up and access the services and they can do it, they can provide names or they can be anonymous, all that kind of thing. And so those ways of working might need to shift in line with the requirements of the procurement and requirements of the Commission. And if that requires shifting it too far, then that's a reason not to go for it. But it's that kind of thing of just making sure that if you're taking on that bid and if you're bidding for it, then you need to accept everything that's within it as well. And then skills and expertise. Can the library deliver and manage even with the recruitment of additional expertise? Do you need partners to do it? Can you do it on your own? Do you want to do it on your own? Is it an opportunity to build new partnerships? A lot of the tendering that I've been involved in the past has been with adoption agencies where it would be social work skills who would be brought in there, but then social workers need specific types of supervision, all that kind of thing, which a library might not have within its management structure. And so there might need to be a partner who could provide that clinical supervision or specific social work supervision that the library might not be able to provide. So it's that opportunity of, can you deliver it within the existing resources and within the existing management structure, or is the need for partners? And I'd always say if there's possibility for partners, it's worth doing it. And then finally, regulatory requirements as well. So some things, again, like sort of adoption support services, would require a registration as an adoption support agency. So again, a partner could hold that potentially, or you might be looking at going for a different type of bid that doesn't necessarily require registration or accreditations. But a lot of the things that you might look at around training, skills development, could easily have those kind of accreditation requirements in, which libraries could easily seek to achieve as well. So there's no reason why you couldn't set up additional registrations and accreditations if it's within the scope of what you're doing. And then I think the kind of commissioning, I just thought it was worth just highlighting this, the three different, very basic, I'm sure Michael and Steph will be able to go into this in a bit more sophisticated detail, but basically a direct tender for a piece of work where you're essentially a single provider or single supplier is being commissioned for a single piece of work. So for example, Star Procurement might be looking for a single service provider to provide a set of children's groups for a certain activity, and that would be one provider provides that, they then deliver that, it's finished, and that's it. And then there's framework tenders. So framework tenders are where, again, for example, Star Procurement might be looking at a selection of different activities for young people for Rochdale Council, for example, and the framework would allow several different organisations to be part of that, so that individual organisations, a library might want to do rhyme times for toddlers, another kind of organisation might want to do groups for teenagers, that kind of thing, but that would all come within the same tender or the same framework, and then often individual sort of mini tenders and mini competitions would happen for the different pieces of work. And then a dynamic purchasing system, which is basically the same, to my understanding. It's basically the same as a framework tender, but rather than everyone getting on at the start, different people can come on at different points as well. So if you see a dynamic purchasing system, it tends to mean that if you want to be part of that, it is open to access at any point as well. So it's worth being aware of that. Whereas some frameworks will open and close at the start, and then you'll deliver through it. The dynamic purchasing system might be something that is available for you to just join onto whenever. So there's a lot kind of that is still currently open, offering kinds of things like that. And then in terms really of what libraries would provide, I think we're going back to the donut model that we've looked at in the previous webinars, where we're looking at all of these different aspects, and particularly around health, around connectivity, around education, jobs and income. I feel like they're some of the core areas, but I think that it's likely that some of them, that there will be commissioning opportunities in different areas. So what I've done just last night, I had a quick look on one of the tender portals So there's portals through which you can find all of these opportunities. I had a quick look through and just identified 5 different opportunities which I think libraries might be able to or interested to go for, just to give a sense of the kind of thing that's out there. So one of these, this first one is from the Derby, Derbyshire, Nottinghamshire and Nottingham City LEP, so the local enterprise partnership, and they've got a short commission tender out for a review and assessment of the work that they've done. The reason I thought this might be suitable for a library service is because it's really focusing on consultation with the wider public as well. So one of the things that you're able to bring in there is really understanding the reach of the library service in terms of accessing and engaging public, and the way that libraries are skilled in putting on activities that can do that as well. Another one, County Durham, looking for a contract for festivals and events evaluation. So again, evaluation might not necessarily feel like something that's a specialism of the library service, but this is looking at an existing framework to assess value, which would be fairly straightforward for a library to do. But again, the key thing is about how it impacts on the local residents of Durham as well. So it feels like that would be an opportunity to put on specific targeted activities to engage and consult with people as well. So it feels like the library network might be a good place to do that. And again, this doesn't have to be the library delivering it on its own. It could be the library delivering it in a partnership with other organisations as well. And then further on, Wirral are looking at stop smoking service. So again, this is something that is basically an advice and information service, and for it to be able to be provided through a network of libraries within a community space feels like that would be a good way to do it. There might be specialist elements to this as well. So obviously I haven't brought the full information of this, but that's the kind of thing that we could then look at starting to find partners to be able to deliver those parts. And then this one is definitely something that would need partnership. So this is a business resilience program from Newark. So it's across Northamptonshire, and is looking at providing specialist advice. So this is a framework tender because it's got 4 lots. So you could bid for individual lots or you could bid for all of them. But the idea then would be, I think it would be really, really helpful for a library to be identifying partners and be able to identify partners that would then be able to provide support within those lots, because you've then got the reach and the infrastructure of the library that could actually provide essentially a framework for individual expertise in these different areas to then support the businesses within the region. And then finally, we've got an example of a DPS, so a dynamic purchasing system. So this is looking at lifelong learning, education, training, and employment. And I've put in bold the categories that I think libraries could easily access and easily provide a level of training for. Whether it meets the requirements of the tender, we don't know yet because we haven't looked at the details. But it feels like that could provide a really, really positive opportunity to look at developing employability, developing engagement and progression, and essentially looking at progress in learning and employment as well, and providing additional support around that. So it feels like those kind of things are where I would initially be looking for library, for areas that libraries could be looking at commissioning. There will be lots more. I'm trying to give some as a kind of an initial taster idea. I'm sure some of you are much more involved in this already and have a lot further along the road and have got much more ambitious schemes than this as well. But it feels like that's kind of a good way to start thinking about the ways that you might get into commissioning and into bidding for commission services. And so I think key points out of that, basically just get the organisation ready. Key thing is about getting senior buy-in and getting the authorisations. If you're a library within a local authority, there might be additional stuff that you need to essentially just get authorisation for or sort out to be able to put in a bid to provide commission services, particularly if it's a bid to the commissioners within your own local authority as well, because there might be challenges there. Staff engagement, make sure they're part of the process and potentially involved in putting the bid together. And then understanding the costs as well. Again, making sure you're not underselling yourself. and then really focus on seeking out a tender in the areas that you and your partners are engaged in already and can demonstrate expertise. Because one of the things that really comes up in procurement is about that, making sure about that demonstrating a track record of provision. And then finally, and I think this kind of thing is, this is the thing that I really hope everyone takes away from today, is that the commissioners don't create the services in isolation. It's not, they're not sitting there just putting them together. What they will be doing is listening to what's happening, listening to who's talking to them, listening to and learning from the previous provision of the services. So I would suggest, if you're interested in supporting employment, find out who's commissioning those services in your area. If they're not commissioning at the moment, start the dialogue now and start talking to them about what the libraries could offer and how we could position the libraries into future procurement rounds over the coming years. So see it as kind of, there will be opportunities now, but it's also a way to start developing and building partnerships to create opportunities for the library sector and for the wider third sector, I suppose, as well, over the coming years as well. So I'm going to pass on now to Kathy Evans from Children England, but I just have an apology for Diana. Diana Edmonds, not Emons. I don't know why I've got that. So Diana Edmonds will be talking after Kathy. But yeah, so I'll pass on now to Kathy Evans, who is Chief Executive of Children England, who will talk a bit about how commissioning works.
Hi everyone, it's a pleasure to be here. I'm not planning to do any PowerPoint presentation. Most of my work on commissioning is really quite particular to the children's sector, which is how I know Ian from his previous roles there. I thought I would just talk a bit about our sector. Children England is the membership body for children's charities. We've been going for long enough, and so have our members, that we remember a time before commissioning our services, but our sector has been learning about the effects of commissioning practices and procurement for probably about 30 years. So if it's new to some of you, I hope that the way I might describe it explains what it might have felt like to some of our charities when commissioning descended, if you like, as the way of doing things. But I'm equally aware that some of you may be just as expert as any of my members if you've already been involved in it. So I'm looking forward to the questions, much more so than pretending that I've got huge expertise to give you. As I said, children's services have always been, and particularly children's charities, have always been part of local communities. Many of them didn't necessarily have funding from the council, or the council might have used to give them a grant, but they weren't contracted and they didn't bid, but they were part of the local service ecosystem. And just like libraries, I think our members know how vital libraries are as a heart of the community, and all sorts of diverse ways in which they're actually part of the social infrastructure of a community. So it remains the case that some of my members aren't commissioned either. They fund themselves, or they're largely volunteers. They exist within the community. That's their purpose. But some don't. Some have chosen not to get involved in commissioning. Some have said ethically it's not what we do, and they found other ways to fund themselves. So I think it can feel very difficult, but one of the things that is important is to make a decision that you own about whether or not you're up for entering into a relationship that can be quite legal and contractual and financial, rather than human and community rooted and voluntary. So we've also learned a lot, having not thought that children's charities and services were a marketplace. We've learned a lot through our members about how to deal with it, to everything from, Ian gave lots of examples there of potential ways that you might need to describe yourself differently from how you would usually, in order to explain why you're the people to do this work. So you kind of need to really kind of own how brilliant you are and think about it in really creative ways. Have you really thought about how essential you are to the local labour market? because of how many people rely on you to come for to come and use and know about and apply for jobs? Or have you thought about how vital you are to family support and homeschooling and out of school? No, there are probably dimensions of what you do which could be very well described to a great number of different commissioning opportunities. So one of the first things that it makes our members do is to think creatively about selling ourselves. And sometimes that's a bit of a culture shift as well, because most public servants that I know, most charity professionals that I know are pretty humble, actually. So commissioning takes you into a realm where you have to big yourselves up and kind of be really clear and bold about how valuable you are. Some of the experiences that we want to learn from that, again, listening to Ian describing the kinds of opportunities, how diverse they are as well. You may find yourself, I imagine, in a situation where the council that you've always operated under has decided to start commissioning what you've already done, what you've been doing forever. And that happened to a lot of our charities, that they used to just get on with what they were doing and the council gave them some money and that was all done by arrangement. And then suddenly the announcement came, what you do is going to have to go through a tendering exercise. So I think there are some real distinctive challenges for being put in that situation, because it is the core of what you do. And one of the risks, and one of the things that can happen in that is that, and my members have experienced it, is that having had a kind of let's see how we get along model for years, when you're asked to say what your costs are going to be for the next 3 or 5 years, our sector tends to underestimate that, or to just accept what we're offered. So many charities have ended up effectively subsidizing the cost of what they do, because it's felt uncomfortable to push for a good, a true reflection. And I don't know anything about how library finances work, but it's been amazing in charities to find out the ways in which we were invisibly subsidizing services that commissioners were contracting. But that's unsustainable. So be really alert to it, really kind of go through your costs and your true costs. Are there things that were paid, are your property costs nothing this year but will be when you need to refurb? All sorts of things that might not be accounted for, because quite legitimately and under best value framework, commissioners and procurement officers will be trying to make sure that they're not giving you any more money than they can get away with. I'll put it that way. I mean, in some of our services, they have a fixed ceiling of the maximum that they will pay, and it's still not enough. So charities have then to make some really difficult decisions about whether they can top up the cost, or whether they can use their fundraising income, or whether they can find a funder to plug the gap. But if you're starting to be commissioned, it's really important to get on the front foot of true cost at the beginning, because we all know that most councils are facing swinging cuts in their own budgets, and if they're starting from thinking that you're cheaper than you are, then it's at risk of getting sliced even further, as they are. Secondly, and Ian said this very well. I see a change recently among a lot of commissioning and procurement professionals to realise that actually what they are involved in and should be doing is approaching this as a relationship, not a transaction. It's so there is some change in procurement culture, and I think it's really vital what Ian was saying about know your commissioner, know your potential commissioner, get to know them, have the dialogue about what's hoped for, get them to understand how you run and where your challenges are, because if there is that commitment to what you're doing and keeping it going, then and that's important to your commissioner, then that's a relationship. It's not like what the procurement team will also be doing, which is finding the cheapest supplier of stationery and the most up-to-date supplier of IT equipment. Because you're a service, it involves people and it involves sustaining expertise, sustaining staff who are vital to make it happen. So it should be approached as a relationship, and the best front foot leading commissioners in the country are really showing what that looks like. The contractual stuff, then, if you're approaching it as a relationship, the contractual stuff can get less intimidating and become the kind of the bureaucracy that happens once we know what we're doing together. And in general, I don't know how it looks in libraries, in relation to libraries, but one of the problems can be caused by competitive tendering processes is that idea that we're now competing with each other instead of learning from each other or partnering with each other, and that can create tensions that I think are worth navigating. If you are considering a partnership, do you already know that organisation and trust them, or are you just doing it for the first time because of a bid? There are some really, really tough experiences of creating partnerships for bids with no knowledge of each other before, and even if you win the bid, that creating a very tense context in which to work out how to work together. So partnerships are usually best founded voluntarily and on your own terms. I think there are lots of really good examples of consortiums and partnerships who've been built on understanding we should bid together. It would be stronger, and it would preserve all of our different specialisms, and it would stop us from competing against each other. So there is real mileage in thinking like that, but beware of fast partnerships forged in a 6-week period to get the money. That's all I would say from experience. If you can, I mean, it may be that this is what you've got to do to sustain your income, and in those cases, just pay a lot of attention to making sure that you're not underslicing what it's going to take to manage the partnership. Because if you are forming a partnership, there are costs of maintaining a partnership and making it work well. They should be factored in to your partnership bid. All commissioners, local and national, are being really encouraged to now, in any tendering exercise, whatever it's for, to pay a lot of attention to social value. And social value, you might get a 10% of the contract will be weighted by social value. We'd really like it to be higher than that. So social value is meant to reflect the fact that if you're a social purpose organisation, if what you do delivers social value, then it makes sense for government to spend public money on organisations that are also delivering social value as well as what the contract asks for. So think about how you would articulate your social value to your community, to the people you serve, to the council, to the commissioner. There are really varied approaches to asking about to what they ask for in social value, but as public benefit organisations delivering public services, you will probably have a very strong story to tell of your own about what social value we know we deliver, and that can and should be playing a more significant part in commissioning and procurement as we go forward. If you're deciding to bid for work that you haven't done before, which is also entirely possible, it might be as part of a partnership where you're bringing what you do know, but there's more to it that others are covering. Or if you think you could do a better job than whoever is doing the one you're bidding for already, just be really alert. Do your study, do your history. What's gone wrong with who's providing it now? I mean, they may not have done, but you may end up with cheapy costs for transferring staff coming over. There may be problems in the organisation, in the staffing, in the delivery, in the costing. that mean that when you get it handed over to you, it's not what you thought or what you bid for. And that's been long, hard learned over the years. But if you're getting into doing something new that was being done by somebody else, definitely don't go in cheap. Because and go in with your eyes open. Find out as much as you can, demand that you get all the information for transferring work. And try to always bid in for evaluation costs to make sure that they are paying towards you being able to demonstrate the value of what they funded. It's not a 100% clear success rate if you do include it. Different commissioners and different funders have different approaches to paying evaluation costs. But as learning institutions, we should definitely be stating that we are committed to evaluating everything we do. So therefore, it's a cost of us doing it, and you should pay it. And hopefully, if everyone does that when they bid, then whoever gets it gets some evaluation money. I think I'm gonna stick there as kind of tips and things to learn from the children's sector. The only overall thing is that I generally spend quite a lot of time trying to encourage public commissioners to understand that they don't always have to go to tender. Commissioning is a really important function for communities. It's about knowing what's needed, where, and who's best to do it. And sometimes there is more of a procurement culture that views that as shopping, like going out and asking, who can we buy this from? And for us, we believe that public services should be commissioned well, not necessarily procured. And commissioners do remain free to make grant making decisions. If they know nobody could do this like you, they can give grants. And part of what we do is try to encourage a culture change and support good commissioning by pushing back a bit on procurement culture where it's not the right thing. So I hope that's given you lots to think about, but I'm definitely looking forward to questions.
That's fantastic. Thank you, Kathy. And I'll be very interested to see what Michael and Steph feel about that culture conflict, I suppose, potentially, or whether that's a direction that you're already thinking as well. Just before we move on to Diana, just want to say we'll be taking questions at the end and we'll kind of have questions of everyone. If you have any questions, put them in the chat throughout. If you just pop in a Q and a colon and then put the question in, we'll be able to pick it up for the end. So yeah, can I now introduce Diana Edmonds, who is National Lead for Libraries at GLL, and she's going to be talking about their experiences of commissioning.
Great. Okay. Could you share the screen, please, with the presentation? Oh, great. Okay, thank you. Okay, well, just to introduce myself, I'm the National Libraries Director for GLL. So that means that I am responsible for libraries within the organisation, but I'm also on the board of GLL, so I have a broader overview. My background has seen a lot of commissioning. I used to run a libraries business, and I bid for work in the commercial sector. So I worked primarily in the rail industry and in the oil industry. So I was quite used to procurement, if you like, but the commissioning is perhaps a little bit different emphasis, really. So I've started to get used to commissioning in the public sector since working with GLL. So if I could just move on. Thank you. So what GLL does internally in its libraries division is we operate public libraries, archives and museum services on behalf of local authorities. And currently we're managing 5 public library services. So 3 of those are in London, in Bromley, Greenwich and Wandsworth, really quite different environments, different boroughs. In Dudley in the West Midlands, which has required a complete learning of a new language, really, and also in Lincolnshire. We also manage library services in 12 prisons. And so that's a different commissioning process, interesting one, but different style, really. So if I could have the next slide, thank you. So how does it start? For us, it often starts with a chat, starts with a phone call. Would you like to come in and have a conversation? And that might be because they know GLL or because they know that they're going out to the marketplace. Because we're involved in libraries, the call initially might come from members of the public, perhaps people who are concerned, if they're running a Save Our Libraries campaign. And that is indeed how we got involved in one of the bids that we subsequently won. So the chat is quite important, because just talking to people, you start to understand, whether you're going to get on and whether you're going to be able to establish a partnership. And it's the partnership relationship that's really important, because although you are providing a service when you're commissioned to provide public libraries, for instance, you're really working in partnership with the council. So it's really important that you're picking up all the vibes all the time on whether you're going to be able to work in partnership with this organisation. So the chat is usually followed, but this isn't, it doesn't always happen like this, but I'm kind of going through what might happen. So then there might be a request for expressions of interest in delivering a particular service. It really is important that if you're going to put in an expression of interest, that you take it seriously from that stage, because the expression of interest is actually marked in many cases. So, the EOI will be categorized in various ways. There'll be various marks assigned to different elements within the expression of interest. And you may well be eliminated at that stage if you don't take care. You may well be eliminated because basically they don't want to work with your kind of organisation, or you're just not the right fit for them. But then suppliers who are selected will be moving on to a formal bidding stage. If I can have the next overhead, please. And then basically there's quite a lot of waiting around, because there's usually quite a significant time span before the invitation to tender is issued. And that's because the client has to produce the specification. Now, because we're working in quite a tight business area, we've noticed that over the years that the specifications have become remarkably similar. So essentially one authority will be taking someone else's authority, and you're kind of watching and seeing if they left in the name of the other provider as you're going through the list of documents that you've got to produce. The waiting around time shouldn't be wasted. That's the time that you can really work on understanding what the service is that you're going to take over, what kind of authority is providing this service, what kind of area you're going to be working in, who are the potential partners that you could work with if you actually win this. So there is quite a lot to do at this point in time. If I could have the next slide, please. And there may be viewings. It's like house viewings, really. But you should always take the opportunity to see the buildings that you might manage. Because in libraries, the condition of the facilities that you might take on is critically important. It's important that you gather as much information as you can on the finances, particularly about the organisation. How much money are they allocating? Sometimes these figures need to be reviewed with, if I'm honest, with some scepticism. certainly they need to be looked at very clearly in a very focused manner. It's also useful at this time to check what the KPIs you're going to be measured by. So some organisations issue massive lists of KPIs. Theoretically, you're going to be providing this on a monthly basis, defending why you didn't hit one, or saying, oh, look, we did better in that area. In our experience, the KPIs are often too lengthy, they're too complex to actually give real information on the quality of the service. So at this point, if you're given the KPIs at this point, it's always really worth going through. Don't just accept them as they are, but if there's a potential to comment, there's a potential to point out that actually you could provide more relevant information, then this is really a useful time to do this as well. And there may be dialogue sessions as well. So this is really an extension of the conversation. You're actually seeing what this client is like. You're identifying what the client's priorities are, and you're really measuring up to say, well, actually, do I want to proceed with this? Do I feel that this client has the same priorities that we do? Or do we feel that this actually is really not going to be a partnership that's going to gel? In my experience, you actually know this quite early on. And there are some bids that I think, in retrospect, we would have withdrawn from if I'd followed my instincts. It's always kind of difficult to follow an instinct, I think, because you're quite careful and you're kind of, ooh, I really should keep going with this. But sometimes you just know that you and that particular partnership, that's just not going to work. Again, the dialogue sessions are useful for working through the finances. And I'm kind of labouring the point about the finances a bit, but you really are committing yourself. And as Kathy said, it's important that you don't underbid, because if you're not aware of the full financial implications, and pensions are really one that you need some expert advice on, because inevitably in our contracts, there's always 2p, and the pensions are really, as it were, the killer. If you've got that wrong, then you're in trouble. And so you want to really have expert advice and support in areas that perhaps are not your native territory. Okay, so eventually you hear the result. And that's great, isn't it? Wonderful, you got it. How fantastic. Time to go down to the pub with the team. It's lovely. Or you didn't. So basically, it's around the you didn't that I'd just like to talk, because there's really no point in dwelling on this. By all means, learn from it, but don't become bitter about this. You may well think it was unfair, or that you were being used because they needed another bidder, and and indeed that may well be the case. But accept that you've learned from that bidding process that you'll bid better. Sometimes your assumptions are wrong. So on a number of bids, I assumed that we just weren't going to get it, and that was it. I subsequently discovered that we were massively undercut. So, I was wrong about my assumptions. And I think that it's just important that you draw back, understand you didn't get it. And I always say, well, my name just wasn't on the contract, and accept it and just move on, learn, and you'll bid better again another time. So that's really what I have to offer on this. Thank you.
That's fantastic. Thank you, Diana. And I suppose I'd just add the bit to that as well, which I think you're not explicitly saying is if you don't get it, really actively seek feedback, because commissioners will provide feedback, especially if you've got through to that level and to the point where you're being actively considered. They will provide a lot more feedback than you'd get probably from a funding application. and often quite constructive, and often quite sort of structured within the structure of the bid as well. So you'll be able to see, actually, we weren't great on price, but we were really good on that bit of delivery. We weren't necessarily quite so good on demonstrating our past experience. And so those kind of things are really, really useful in terms of then, as Diane was saying, regrouping and submitting the next bid. The other thing that just jumped out, that thing about KPIs that Diana was saying, we've had a lot of, we had a lot of KPIs where literally it was KPIs and monitoring forms and things like that that were just replicated, cut and pasted from the previous provider. And so they were not driven by the needs of the commissioner, they were driven by the limitations of the management systems of the previous organisation as well. So if you think you can improve on them within that, within your bid, then it's worth a try. It's definitely worth a try. So thank you, Diana. So now I'm just going to pass over to Michael and Steph from Star Procurement. And again, keep putting questions in the chat. Anything you want to ask any of us about any of this, then just pop the question in.
So thank you, Ian. So yes, there's some really interesting things been discussed and mentioned now. Some aren't in here. So just a couple I want to point out, I suppose, or pick up on before I start. So for example, I think it was Kathy talked about grant versus procurement, and that's absolutely something I agree with. A lot of our partners we're seeing are changing from grants to procurement. I know this is a public forum, sometimes I do question some of those decisions, but it's not in our hands. We just have to follow the procurement rules with that decision. But yeah, I think there's a time and a place for grants and time and a place for procurement, and getting that decision right is quite important. I also want to talk a little bit about social value as well. So I think Steph's going to mention some of that. But for example, in Star, across our partners, we try and make social value 20% of the weighting, because we believe it's very important to local communities that they get some return out of our contracts. So we kind of try and prioritise that. And for example, I did a tender for one of our partners and made it 30% because it was appropriate to what we were buying. So it will swap and change depending on what you're buying, or what the requirement is. And then also at Star, we do something called risk-based sourcing. So we don't, it is somewhat rigid, but not as rigid as some procurement processes. So for example, contracts below the threshold, so I was going to say EU threshold, but we don't call it that anymore. Yeah, contracts below the legislative threshold, we take a risk-based approach. So depending on if there's a local market and what the risks of the contract are, dictate the kind of documentation we use and whether we do closed competition within those local providers. So we still have requirements on the number of bids we've got to get back, but it might be we only invite local companies rather than an open advert. So we've got flexibility to try and keep competitions simple and relevant. So yeah, and then some of this I'll pick up in the presentation. So I'm going to talk a bit about growth and business strategy. So Star, we are a shared service. We're not a company or some kind of legal entity. We are hosted by Trafford Council and employees of Trafford Council. So we have to abide by everything a council would have to follow. But we work across our 4 main partners. We also provide services to 2 clinical commissioning groups, some wholly owned companies of our partners, and we also provide services outside of our those existing relationships. So we've had a good think a couple of years back around how we wanted to grow. So what did we think we could deliver? So think about how you can diversify. So what are the different services, products you could sell? What skills exist in your team? So obviously we are procurement, so that's our main service, but we've got a lot of wealth within our team. We're 39-ish strong organisation within STAR. So obviously yes, procurement, but we do business and service reviews. So for example, some of the work I've done in the past around coroner's services. So when I've got commissioned by the West Midlands to do a review of their related coroner's services. So building on your experience can create some great income opportunities for you. We do training as well, set social value, so we can support implementation of social value. And then we also developed something called a collaboration accreditation review. So that's looking at shared services. So it's not about what they're doing, it's about the governance that surrounds that shared service. And that is in partnership with a private organisation. And we've gone through the rigmarole to try and make that a compliant process, but do think about partnerships and just to think about what skills exist that you can build on. Think about the facilities that you have, so what spaces are available, and then also think about charging. So a big thing that I've had to think about for STAR is the charging and pricing policy, so to comply with legislation, but also making sure that we're not making a loss. So I've got big spreadsheet, that comes up with day rates to make sure that we charge appropriately for the work we do. As we mentioned before, thinking about what you might want to bring in, so what support you might need. So internally within the authority or the organisation, what can the rest of the organisation support you with? So you might already have SLAs with finance and HR and IT, but do you need to renegotiate those because you want them to support you in a different way? And I say partner with finance, data protection, war procurement, because there might be things you can deliver together under the council rather than just a siloed service. And then thinking about external, so how can you partner with your neighbours? Are there local charities within your borough that you might partner with, or community groups? So think about not just say internally, the wider community and how they might be able to support you. But like I said, there will be issues when you go outside of the public sector to build those partnerships. So you need to think carefully about how you create those and I'd say procure those so that you're compliant with internal rules. And that you need to think ahead because it takes time to build those relationships and to get the governance that you need. Briefly going to talk about some of the legal aspect. So, because I say there might be some variety of where people are on this presentation. So the Local Authority Act 1970 gives the power to local authorities to trade, and it gives the power to make a profit when you're selling to another public body or an organisation designated by the Secretary of State. So there is a power there that you can sell, so there's no issues around that. And it might seem odd for a procurement person to say this, but it's up to the buying authority to consider their compliance. So you don't need to worry about how they buy you. That's for them to worry about. So you just think about how you sell and how you get the money coming in. So when you're selling to non-public bodies, the Local Government Act 2003 introduced powers for local authorities to charge for individuals or the private sector. However, there are limitations on that and its cost recovery. So you can't really make a profit when you sell to non-public bodies. But then there's a question of what is a profit, and that's something you need to consider internally. What you're comfortable with. I'm very risk averse on that matter compared to some colleagues, but then I make the charging policy, so I've got that I'm comfortable with our approach within STAR. And then in a similar way, if you wanted to make a profit, if you're selling to non-public bodies, you have to create a company, and that's set out in, again, the Local Government Act and the Localism Act. So there's only, basically, through a wholly owned company or some form of, and it could be a mutual, could be, which I think now other forms of companies. It doesn't have to be a limited company. It could be something else that you could use to try and create a profit. But in line with some of that, thinking about STAR, so we are branded as STAR, but we're not an entity. So that's something you might want to think about as well. Do you want to brand yourself as the council, or do you want to create a different kind of brand and sell as the council, trading as name or something like that. In terms of, so that's the legal side. In terms of legislation, internal governance, you need to look at your constitution and whether that requires you to seek approvals to sell or bring in income. So now our four don't, but I have seen some constitutions which do require approvals for income generation. So that's something you need to bear in mind, and that will be dependent upon each organisation. So if the constitution does require approval, you can either consider trying to get it changed so that it comes out, or trying to seek delegations to the corporate director, or again to the head of service, and then internal delegations within your service. So for example, I have my director's given me certain authority to come up with pricing and bids, but I can't sign anything. She has to do that. So it's thinking about who you want to have authority to do what. So when you're bidding, you've got that all lined up, so you can do things quickly. In terms of then identifying opportunities, the first few bullet points, they're the main sites. And I can share this, I've already shared this with Ian, so I'm happy for this to go out. So they're the main like UK and nations links, and then through those you will find other portals that's specific to the buying organisations. But you can see some thresholds there. I don't know what the thresholds are, I'm afraid, for Wales and Northern Ireland to using those portals. ProContract is what Greater Manchester councils use, but there's North East councils, there's South East councils, there's a whole range of organisations that use that. You register once and you're on, so you'll see everything through there. Bloom is something slightly different, but it allows you to provide consultancy or some kind of professional service. So I know a lot of councils use Bloom to commission or to buy services, so it's worth having a look and trying to get on there to sell through that route. Intend is another portal, a bit like ProContract, but it has a different link for every single buyer. So it's something you'd have to register on multiple times, put the same information in, but you have to register for each individual buyer. So it's just something to bear in mind. My Tenders, I think, is a one registration. You access everyone who uses it. So anyway, it's just there's lots of ways, lots of portals out there, so it can be difficult to find opportunities. So I've got an email address set up that I've registered under all of these, and then I trawl that every day to see what's come through. So it does take a bit of time. To spend about 5-10 minutes every morning just going through all the emails that it produces. And in terms of commissioning engagements, I think some of that's been discussed, but I started to think about internal. So before it even goes out to procurement, the things you can do internally. So try and liaise with the head of commissioning or adults or children's, whatever, the public health, and just talk to them, find out what their needs are. Try and get a forward plan from procurement. So if there's a pipeline from procurement or indeed with the service, and have a look at that and see what, before they go out to market, what they're doing. Then you can return to them with some kind of offer to say, well, have you thought about using us for this, this and that? And then it's more of an internal recharge than anything else. And then you've nipped it in the bud before it manages to go out. Obviously get support from your corporate director if you need to do that, if you're struggling with that engagement. Again, internal, consider some of the supported or shared services. So Ian's mentioned adoption agencies. So there's a number of adoption agencies, council kind of managed agencies within Greater Manchester in particular, but they're hosted by one of the authorities that takes part. But again, like I said, it could be a recharge. So if you can offer something to that agency, they might be able to divert money within the partnership before they go out to procurement. So don't just think about the council, think about who does it partner with, what relationships are there. In terms of external, so one of our tricks is we use members. So we have a board and we have a joint committee that oversee us. So we use them, we use our board members are Section 151 officers or the like, and also elected members to get us in to have conversations with other organisations. So, for example, my director calls it tea and buns. So she uses our members to arrange tea and bun sessions with, for example, the neighbouring council, so we can talk about what we might be able to do for them. We've tried it, cold emailing, cold calling doesn't work. It just gets deleted, moved. So it takes a lot of time and effort to set that up. So I'm just saying that I don't recommend that. Implemented reform research, to do research into public bodies in particular, because they have transparency data, they have spend data on their websites. Anything over £500 reports, they've got 5k and over spend, and then they've got contract registers. So again, anything over £5,000 should be on this public contract register. So you can use that information to find out what's coming up for renewal. You can try and speak, I think it has a name, it should have a commissioner name as well. So you can then speak to the commissioner before it comes up for renewal. And by renewal, I mean an extension option or retender. So just because they have an option to extend, they shouldn't automatically take that. So it's worth getting in and having a conversation beforehand, because it might push them to go back out to market rather than just taking up the option to extend. I mean, I hate these, but submit an FOI. So if you're struggling to find information, put in a specific request, and you should get that easily. Obviously, that's public bodies. If you're trying to work with get the data out of charities, for example, that obviously can be more difficult to obtain. Know your customer, so say, do your research, try and understand what they want, what's been going on. Look out for market engagement events. So, for example, at STAR, we have a market engagement protocol. So we encourage market engagement before a tender goes out. So I'll say that's kind of our default, and really only where we don't think it's appropriate would we not hold on. So look out for market engagements, because it's your chance to influence the specification, influence what they want before they've finalised it. We've got Meet the Buyer events as well. So again, at STAR, we would hold Meet the Buyer days. It's too late at that point to influence what they want to buy, but it gives you a good idea, speak in person about their requirements and get a better feel for what it is they're looking for. But ultimately, this is all pre-tender, so anything goes. So again, I know I'm procurement, but approach the service direct. You don't have to come through us if it's pre-engagement, pre-market. You can have those conversations direct. The service or the commissioner, they may worry because they, some of ours do go off on their own, and some of ours are worried about breaking the rules. But like I said, it is pre-procurement, so there's nothing really for them to worry about. I'm wondering if am I on your bit, Steph?
Yes, you might be.
I'll hand over to Steph now.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. I was just going to give a quick rundown of the tender process. We've covered bits and bobs throughout the last hour or so, but I'll just give a rundown from sort of the buyer's point of view. So Michael's just been through the pre-tender side of it. So during the tender, once you obviously know what you're tendering for, once you've seen the documents, compile a list of the things that the buyer is requesting, mandatory information, the nice to haves, make sure you can actually do what they're asking you to do. When you're looking at the tender documents, check the weightings, see what the price quality split is, and what is the most emphasis. Is social value included? Probably so. Like Michael said, we tend to go for 20% minimum, and check the question weightings as well in the quality side of it, which is the most highest. Understand all of that, and obviously do your emphasis on the point on the higher weightings as the points make prizes. Check if there's any minimum acceptable scores. You can be ruled out in the quality stage if you score under the minimum acceptable score. Your bid won't go any further and you'll be taken out at that stage, but it would be stipulated in the documents. And always obtain your approval to bid. If you haven't got that, you shouldn't be bidding. Okay, when you get the documents, obviously check the response timescales, make sure that you can do what you need to do within the timescales. Check that if there's any response word page limits, if you go over, anything over the response word limits might not be scored. So it could be the most important bits at the end, it won't be looked at. So do not provide public material unless they specifically ask, or unless we specifically ask for it. This is like literacy documents, things like that. It just adds to the tender, and if it's not required, don't include it. And always allow plenty of time to prepare and submit your bid. Don't run out of time. If you are going to include any attachments, make sure you number them to correspond with the questions. It's nothing worse than going through a tender and not knowing what goes with what. And double check that you're submitting all of the requested documents as part of your bid. Just make sure everything is there before you get everything bid. Okay.
Oh, sorry.
It's all right. So during the tender, lean on your support services that you've got at hand. So if you do need any information regarding insurance, HR, that'll have policies, processes you need to include, your departments are there, so use them as you need to. If you need to partner with anyone, like has been discussed, make sure you get on that. You know, your internal departments are there. So yeah, make sure you're on with that, and ensure that you understand the requirements of the specification fully. Make sure you answer the questions that they're asking. Read it, read the spec, read it again and read it again. I can't emphasize enough how much you need to make sure you know what the specification is and that you can actually do what they're asking. Okay, so following on that, make sure you answer the question that's asked. It's nice to think you can do it, but make sure you know what you're talking about, and you are answering the question that they are asking you to do. Plan and delegate your tender prep work. Don't underestimate the resources that are required. It's quite a lengthy process. And if you are unsure about anything, just ask. There's always clarification parts within all these portals. Like, for example, the chest, we use the question and answer facility. It's monitored all the time. So if you don't understand, or if you don't think you've got all the information, or you just need something confirming, just ask a question on the portal. It should be answered. Usually it's answered within a day or so. And those answers will go out to all people who are registered on this tender opportunity, so everyone can see the same information. Okay, if the tendering portal, like I said, it's monitored all the time by the buy-in people. We can put out notifications at any point. So, for example, if a document has had an amendment to it, we'll always put it out, and it'll go out to everybody who's registered an interest. So it's always worthwhile, keep lookout for any notifications that come through. So this could be amendments to documents, or it could be answers to questions that other people have raised. So yeah, you will get an email notification through the portal. So again, make sure that whoever has registered on the portal, that it's either a generic email address that anyone can access, or it's a person that is going to be there all the time, because it will only go to that particular email address that has been registered on the portal. Some portals may require resubmission pending some amendments. So, for example, if you've submitted your bid and then an amendment has come through to a document, for example, it may ask you to resubmit it. So always, again, keep your eye on the notifications.
It depends on how big the change is. So sometimes if it's a significant change, and we've had it on tenders we've bid for, and they just, reject's not the right word, but they just cancel all submissions, and you have to amend and resubmit. So it's just double check, because you don't want to be caught out by that kind of action.
Yeah, so you think you've already done, and unfortunately you're not. So yeah, but you would get a notification. And any questions that are raised by any of the bidders and the responses that go out, will form part of any contract that goes forward on the award. So the questions in the supplier, the SAQ, the supplier assessment questionnaire, or something similar. This is the looking back, so it will always focus on what have you done, what resources, capacity, do you have, what skills and experience do you have. They usually pass and fail, which is usually insurance, past experience, mandatory exclusion grounds, fraud, etc. It would always stipulate whether it's pass and fail. If you can't provide exactly what is required, i.e. the references, submit a question via the chest about the situation to explain. You'll always respond.
Yeah, so this is around, because we've had it on a few of our first bids, we've provided the service internally. So will they accept a reference from our director, for example, because that's within our organisation. We don't have an external reference. So you need to double check some of those on the first few occasions. Obviously, once you've got a few contracts under your belt, it's not something you need to worry about too much, but certainly in the early days, it will be something you'll need to double check.
Yeah, okay. And read and respond fully to the questions. Just make sure you supply everything that they're asking for. Okay, so the quality award questions, these are looking forward. So what will you do? How will you do it? Don't ignore any questions. Focus on the higher weighted questions as mentioned, and those with the highest minimum acceptable score. They're going to be the questions that you get the points for, and the higher scores. Your core offer, give the customer what they want, not what you think they should have. It's too late at this stage. However, if you do have, or you think there is a better way of doing something, going off their specification, you can always post a question, ask them if they'll accept a alternative solution. They could come back and say, no, we won't, it's a non-varying bid, so you put in what we want. But there is no harm then in putting in two bids. Your first one is what they're asking for, and bid number 2 is what you think you could do, which goes slightly off what their specification, but there's no harm in that. That probably wouldn't be scored, but at least you're going to, with your bid 1, you put in what they've actually asked for. Yes, so we've sort of touched on this with the other speakers. Tailor your answer to the specific organisation. So there is nothing worse than copying a paste answer and reading your answer, and it mentions another authority in the answer when it's clear that it has been copied and pasted over from another tender bid. Just make sure it reflects what you're proposing, rather than what you are proposing to change or improve. Go back to your basics. Added value, include relevant information, why you're the best, why do they want you, sell yourself, be clear and concise with your response, and honest and realistic as well. Don't overpromise. Okay, the social value as mentioned is a serious consideration needed. We do try and weight ours at minimum 20%. Based on the TOMS, which is the themes, outcomes and measures, which is a national framework designed to help organisations. There is lots of information on the internet about that. It's just basically a Google search under TOMS social value, and a vast of information comes up that can help. And it just added value to the communities beyond the specification. So yeah.
We've got lots of info on our website on the public side, but basically it's social benefits, environmental benefits, and economic benefits. So that's what we're looking for, and how the community benefits obviously from those. And TOMS, as Steph said, it kind of provides a monetary value. So when you're bidding, you can say, if by me delivering this or that or the other, it creates X pounds of value back into your communities. So it just helps sell some of that. We split our weighting into quantitative and qualitative. So we do use the property value as part of the rating, but then we also use a qualitative evaluation as to how are they going to deliver social value. So sometimes you may get the split, sometimes you might not, but it's worth bearing that in mind. So yeah.
Okay. So on the financial side of your bid, just be clear on your pricing model and state any assumptions you've made. Really, there shouldn't be any assumptions. So if you are unsure of anything, post a question. Make sure it's clear what you're pricing on. Is it a fixed price, or is it time and materials, day rate, hourly rate? How fixed is the price? Make sure you check the tender documents to see if they're stipulated, whether it's fixed, 1, 2, full contract. If it doesn't say that, what you need to state is what your price is based on, whether that is fixed for a year, 2 years, etc., etc. And make sure you price for all elements of the specification as stated in the invitation, and make sure it's in the format given. Don't go off and do your own jazzy spreadsheet of all sorts of stuff. If you've been given a format to use, it would make it impossible for the buyer to actually compare like for like. And ensure you've taken everything into account of the elements of the bid, like the overheads, TUPE, etc. And don't enter a range of rates where a specific single rate is requested, because again, it'd be impossible to actually do a comparison on the bids.
Yes, you might have to do some kind of average of your rates in able to put forward that one single rate.
So if the submission requires a single price or a series of total one, make sure the bid can be totaled up accordingly. Check your maths, always check your maths, and double check your maths, and be realistic with your pricing. Make sure you scrutinise all your costs and get your price right. Like has been discussed, you don't want to be going in something that you're going to lose money on. Okay, so towards the end of it, after you've got your bid together, get someone to review it, your spelling mistakes, grammar mistakes. It's always good to get a second eye to check the quality and response and make sure it does make sense to people who are reading it. Make sure the right person has signed any documents, whether they've got the delegated authority to do that. And most importantly, submit your bid on time. Try and do it if you possibly can the day before. You will have been given probably at least between 3 and 4 weeks, probably more for something like this, to get your bid together. So if you can do it the day before, this will just negate any technical issues you might have, and buy yourself some breathing room should you encounter any issues uploading your bid to the portal. You can always amend it. You can always resubmit your bid if you need to for any reason whatsoever. But if you submit it, say 10 minutes before the deadline and it goes over, it's classed as a late bid and you might be rejected. So just make sure you give yourself plenty of time to do this. That's it.
That's brilliant. Thank you, Michael and Steph. That was excellent and a lot of information there to digest. Does anyone have any questions immediately? We've got a few minutes for questions. No? Does Diana and Kathy, do you have anything to add or feed into that as well?
I thought that...
I'll go.
Kathy, you go first.
I was just going to bring up that that was all about really practical advice about how to be involved and what to do. I didn't mention, and I don't think we've particularly mentioned that there is at national level, there's procurement reform being discussed, and proposals made in a green paper. Some of it is intended to make a lot of procurement more streamlined, and that's certainly part of the hope. Than some of the complexity that many feel they've had to go through. There are other reasons to be cautious about it. We're not, we've been trying to influence change to better reflect the difference between services for people in the community and buying, supplies, and that that ideally you shouldn't be experiencing commissioning that feels like you're buying widgets, but that respects the skills and the skills and the expertise and sustaining the service. But at the moment, that's not. I just thought it was relevant to bring up, because you might come across people debating whether or not procurement is going to stay the same.
Yeah, I think it is worth mentioning. I think it certainly will make life more flexible for both parties. Whether it makes life less complex, I'm not so sure, because of that flexibility, that there won't be. So, for example, now there's basically everyone uses the open procedure, and it's very rigid in how that must work. Under the new legislation, there'll be some weird name they've given it, and then you can tailor that as you see fit. So there'll be lots of different ways of doing buying the same thing going forwards. So it will create more flexibility, so it's bespoke to your needs, but you don't expect to bid the same way twice. Unfortunately, I know.
I think the other thing, just to add to that as well, is that there's huge variability between different procurement teams. I mean, one of the reasons we asked Star Procurement along was because I've had experience of bidding for things that Star have put out in the past, and they've been incredibly well structured and really easy to bid for. And you'll find that some tender submissions and just the documentation and the structure of it fits really well with how you're thinking about the service and how you would like to deliver the service, and it almost kind of writes itself, because you're able to just fill it in. Whereas some of them are just, well, with some of them feel like they're set there as obstacles to get over rather than as a way for you to showcase your best work. So I think we've had kind of an example of best of breed from Star as well, which is really good. But just be aware that there will be some little corners of procurement where best practice isn't necessarily being applied.
And it might just be worth flagging for that there is a thing called the Public Procurement Review Service. If you feel like you've had a particularly raw deal or an unfair process, or that's how it's looking, you can go to the Public Procurement Review Service and say, this doesn't feel like a fair process, or they're not giving us enough time under the, we're meant to have enough time to form a partnership, they're expecting us to do this without cheapy information. All of those things are challengeable. And if you get to that point, it's definitely better to try and bring it up in the relationship dialogue. But the review service will get into that without disclosing that you referred it.
Yeah. Diana, you were about to say something before.
I was just going to say that I just thought that was a really comprehensive review. It was great. If I'd never written a tender before, I think I'd be able to go and do one straight away. It's just very sensible, really, really helpful advice. I thought your list of sources of tenders was really great. And I made a quick note to make sure that we're on them all, but really, really helpful presentation, just super. Thank you.
Thank you.
Brilliant, thank you. Is there any last word that you want, Michael and Steph?
No, just I hope it was useful. Like I say, we're happy to help. Like I say, with social value, if you do need support with that, we've got lots of information on our website for our own bidders. So by all means, feel free to go there and steal information to help you when you're bidding.
Brilliant, thank you. We've got also on the strategic toolkit for the future funding, we've got a list of the TOMs broken down by theme as well. So we've kind of got them separated out into jobs, and then as we're starting to go through the other sections, we're filtering out the TOMs that we feel are probably relevant to that as well. So if that would be useful, then please do have a look at that. Thank you, Kathy. And Yeah, and thank you. The future funding is supported by the Arts Council as well. So just thank you to the Arts Council. And then thank you to our speakers, Diana Edmonds from GLL, Michael and Steph from Star Procurement, and Kathy from Children England. Thank you. And we usually have these every fortnight, but we're just conscious that in a fortnight's time, it's the Easter holidays. So we'll probably skip one and then do one after that. And we are looking at reviewing them slightly because we might do one on the Community Renewal Fund and some of the other sources of funding out there as well. But we'll send a bit of information out just to ask you what you think would be the best thing to do and what you would like to see in these. And the other thing to mention is just that all these presentations, and particularly the links, we'll probably pull that out of the presentation as well, to the tender aggregators. Will be on the Income Generation Network. If you're not part of that, then drop me an email and we'll make sure you can be part of that. So thank you again to all our speakers, and thank you to everyone for getting here, and thank you for shifting the time as well to accommodate the speakers. And we'll see you in a couple of weeks' time.